Hello and welcome to the Sandro Forte podcast. Over the many years I've been running a business, I've met many successful people, entrepreneurs, sports stars, celebrities, and dare I say, even royalty. So what makes a person successful? Do we know what success is? And the all-important question, can we create success for ourselves? This podcast series invites a diverse group of people to share their insights, their wisdom, and the things they've learned along the way. Today I'm joined by founder and CEO of Unstoppable Software, Sam Schutte. Every aspect of our world in this day and age involves some kind of software, and Sam is the brains behind some of the most unique software development going on in the USA. It's not only his company's ability to develop great software that has seen him working with numerous billion-dollar organizations, but it's his expert ability to bridge the gap between developers and upper management that sets him apart from other consultants, something he learned through his experience. So welcome, Sam.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Very, very good to have you with us. So tell us about life before you set up Unstoppable Software.
Yeah, absolutely. So I, went to college at University of Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and majored in computer science there. So I kind of went into the technical side. That is a very theoretical degree and kind of very deeply nerdy, and got out and started, I had the good fortune right out of college to start working for a commercial software product company that was actually a publicly traded listed company that was in the healthcare space. And so I worked as a software developer for probably about, 10 or 12 years then. I worked for a lot of startups. I worked for IT departments at companies like hospitals, insurance companies. So I kind of had a pretty broad range of experience. And I think towards the sort of end of my employee days, I guess you might say, I worked for probably 3 different startups in a row that, got funding, got sold, got funding, went out of business, so and so forth, ran out of money, whatever. And I kind of said, I think I can do this, because after you see it enough times, you realize they don't have any magic, some magic skills you don't have. Right. And so, actually a friend of mine, like a lot of people, because I think a lot of people start a company because they plan for years and years and years, and finally they launch it, or it just happens, right? And I was sort of in that latter case, had nothing better to do, I had a contract finish, and a friend of mine was an executive at a company and said, "Why don't you come over here and work on some software for us?" And so I started. It was just myself with one-man shop doing that in January of 2008.
Wow, that's all happened in a relatively short space of time. I need to pick up on a lovely word you used. Forgive me for repeating it for you, Sure. But the word nerdy. Now, a lot of people, when they hear people like you that have excelled at what you do and they hear the word nerdy, they automatically assume that in this particular case, Sam Schutte must be a real academic. Does it necessarily follow, Sam, in your experience, that to be successful, I mean, in business generally, but in particular, in your profession, in your industry, does it naturally follow that you have to be really bright?
I think if you want to be a software developer, yes, I think you have to be, you have to be pretty bright to be able to do that well. But I think if you want to be an entrepreneur who happens to have a background in software development, it's not that you don't have to be bright, but that may not be the most important thing, or it's not the only important thing, rather. I think on interpersonal skills, ability to communicate, sort of some guts to go out there and do it. There are plenty of folks who, and I know folks who, they weren't the best software developer in the world, or maybe they weren't even the greatest IT person in the world, but they had an incredible business sense and incredible ability to sell, or otherwise just communicate with people who have grown, incredible businesses. I remember when I was in college, I had a sort of mentor to me say that, in business, the D students, the students who have D grades end up in charge of the C students. The C students manage the B students, and the B students manage the A students, right? And I think that's kind of been true. It's like if you don't necessarily have to be the smartest person in the room to be the best business person.
That's a really good answer, actually, and something in my experience I would agree with wholeheartedly. So I always love speaking to people who are disruptors, and we'll talk a little bit about how you've positioned yourself differently in your very competitive marketplace. But before we get to that point, what makes somebody that's doing very well in the corporate world suddenly leave all that behind and go off? You mentioned that an opportunity came along. Was it as simple as that, or had you planned it? Was there a 20-page business plan, or was it just an opportunity and you thought, I'm going to go for it?
Yeah, no, there was no business plan. I don't think I wrote a business plan and probably until the company was already more than 5 years old, because it was just, I'm sort of the opinion that I know too many people who spend years and years writing business and marketing plans. And it's not that those are worthless. I think they are good. But, if that's all you do is write the plan, then it can be worthless, right? You have to actually act. And so I think I was 100% action and 0% planning, maybe, which, maybe it's just luck that we ended up okay, because obviously sometimes that can be disastrous, right? If you have no plan and you just act on it. But no, and I think as far as what led me to break out on my own or to want to, I think the problem in a lot of any kind of engineering field is you have all the responsibility and none of the authority, right? You're the guy that gets blamed when the system breaks down, when the plant breaks, whatever kind of technical job you have, whether it's mechanical or software or anything. But you don't get to make any decisions. Even what you build or what you're allowed to build sometimes can be constrained, and that can be very frustrating when you're like, and this is common in any kind of technical field. It's like, if only I could just do things the right way. Right? You hear people say. And so I think that was always frustrating to me. I wanted to, have the ability to be the one that makes the decisions, and at least kind of have the buck stop with me. And that's probably been like the most enjoyable thing to me, or personally rewarding thing to me, is that, hey, it may have been a failure. Maybe this didn't work, but you know what? Like, it was completely my decision. I didn't have to get permission. I did it. And whether it succeeded or failed, it's mine, right? So,
what was it about then your experiences, Sam, in those early days that led you to deciding to set up the business that we now know as Unstoppable Software? In other words, what were the opportunities? I know you speak of the fact that you had observations of your industry and certain issues with it. So, what was ultimately the motivation for Unstoppable Software?
Well, and so I think it ties into a little into our name, Unstoppable. What I ran into in corporate IT, especially, and sometimes in startups, is a lot of people who you hear a lot of we can't, right? This can't be done. Oh, there's no way. And so in my head, what I thought to myself is, I wanted to be in, and it's cheesy, but I wanted to be in the business of yes, right? Like, there is a way that we can do this, and consistently, I think for our customers, we hear from a lot of them like, man, we've tried for 5 years to get this built. We've tried for however long to do this. We've had multiple teams in here trying to do this, and they give up or they say we can't. So that was one thing, is I wanted to be, very tenacious and sort of, not give up on hard problems. And then I think also, I wanted to be, I believe very strongly that, the way to get high output out of software developers and create high performing teams with them is to create a shop that's just a really optimal place for them to work, and a lot of our developers, even though, we're a small business, a lot of them have been with us for, 9-10 years. And I think it's because, we don't experience the kind of turnover that you sort of hear out there in the industry. And I think it's because we've sort of created an environment that they can just really do their best work and not feel constantly like they're hitting political, head walls or something like that.
Today we're talking not just to an entrepreneur who's disrupted his market, his industry, and gone down a slightly different path, having identified some of the issues that were being faced by both businesses and consumers, but also an individual who, left the corporate world, left down the nice, cozy job, and instead said, I'll do it on my own. And so I'm kind of going to try and prize out the USPs as well as also your experiences as an entrepreneur and also leading a team. So, we're having a conversation today about a leader in his industry too. So I understand, Sam, that the I'll do it on my own as a consultant conversation takes place in your mind at a time when you had a pregnant wife and a house on the market, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So, just about the wrong time to make that kind of decision. What advice would you give to people who are using things like that as an excuse for inertia?
Well, and I also was in night school to get my MBA. So I had gone back to school. My wife was pregnant. We had listed our house on the market. It was 2008. And I mean, the housing market was already kind of weird then, right? And so, yeah, we always sort of joke about it like, well, I don't know, what else do we do? I don't know, let's start a company. Why not? So there were a lot of reasons why you shouldn't. And I guess what pops into my head is, there's a Martin Luther King quote that I might paraphrase that he says, it's never the right time to do the right thing. It's never a good time to do the right thing. And so I think it's sort of like, if it's right for you, and it certainly felt right for me, then, there's no reason to wait. There's no reason to try to make, to compromise that and do it later. I mean, I have a lot of friends. I hear from all sorts of folks that, well, I'm going to save up, all the money I need for retirement, and then I'll feel comfortable starting a business. And that's kind of crazy to me, because maybe you start your business and in a year you've covered your retirement. I mean, there's obviously tremendous earning potential. I mean, if you look at all the billionaires in the top 50 billionaires in the U.S., I mean, a huge portion of them got it from starting a business. Why would you wait until everything was perfect? Because there is no perfect time. The time to act and the time to go out there is now, and not when it feels right, because it's never going to feel right.
And as a leader, Sam, what is it about your environment? What's it about the culture that you've created that has led to a lack of, almost the opposite of that transience you speak of, a large turnover of staff in your industry? What's kept people loyal and engaged to you? Is it a particular leadership style? Is it a culture that you've created? So what is it about Unstoppable that's encouraged people to see this all the way through?
Well, I think part of it is that I'm a big believer in egalitarianism. And so I'm almost uncomfortable when people say, if they introduce me as, here's my boss, right? And I always kind of position it. And I mean, yes, of course I am. But I always sort of say it's really more that, we're a team and I'm the coach, but you're the quarterback, and who's more important, I mean, coaches sometimes can be replaced easier than quarterbacks on some teams, right? And at least in American football here. And I think that puts people sort of on an equal footing with me, that they're not afraid to bring things up or ask questions. And then I try to have complete transparency. I mean, our developers, they know what our rates are, they know what our project costs are, they know what our margins are. I mean, it's like, why have some big secret about it? Because then, sometimes the secret is worse than the truth, them sitting there wondering, I wonder how much he's making on this project, but if they know and they're like, oh, that's reasonable, he worked hard to land this deal. Okay. Then I think it just establishes trust is the bottom line.
Well, some of those words I've heard, I've been furiously noting down. And it sounds to me, Sam, that you're being very modest, if you don't mind me saying so. So what is it about you? Maybe no one's ever asked you this question before, and maybe you don't particularly feel comfortable answering it. But what is it about you, Sam Schutte, that has made you so successful? Do you have a mantra? Do you have a set of principles that you live by? Is that, what you've learned as part of your upbringing? Have you developed those ideas and those beliefs? Have you gone along, or has it just all kind of happened because you've taken that action that you speak of?
I guess that's a good question. I think I mean, that's kind of hard to answer. I guess I don't have a built-in mantra that I default to, but I know that I like people, and I think like most of us, I want to be liked, and so I really want anybody I work with to be happy. It's very important with me and important to me. And I think when whether it's an employee or a customer, if they're unhappy or they're not, whatever, I don't feel like I'm doing as much as I can for them. That really bothers me. That I think I lose sleep over that. So I don't know that I've distilled that down to a message or something, but maybe that's just part of my personality. Is I do care what other people think, as opposed, and I know there's some business leaders that are the opposite of that, and that can work for them too. Particularly in some industries where you have to be a little more ruthless, maybe. But I think, it's important to, really establish deep relationships with your customers and your employees. And I think that's part of what makes me tick.
Well, I think you've answered that question very well, because I've heard words like, care and inclusivity and transparency. So I think you've done a great job of answering that question, which I do realize was a tough one. No one ever likes answering that kind of question.
Yeah, no problem.
But you've already mentioned your team and the fact that they've been with you, many of them for a period of time. How important is a great team to the success? And I know this is a slightly rhetorical question, Sam, but how important is your team to your own personal success?
Oh, I mean, just obviously just vital, right? I think without a great team, you're nothing, essentially. I mean, and certainly there are many stories of just incredible leaders and incredible visionaries out there who make a lot of bad hires, can't inspire people, and just everything falls apart. Now, the natural follow-up question is, well, how do you create a great team? How do you find a great team? And I think that can be a very, very nuanced thing, but especially in the consulting services business, I mean, we are nothing except for the abilities and strengths and sort of values of our team members.
Now, you're speaking today to a Gen X. So I'm the kind of guy that has absolutely no clue what you're talking about if you talk to me about software and technology and hardware and all the other things in between. So for people like me, but there will be a lot of people out there as well who want to know a little bit more about what Unstoppable is. Could you give us just probably a simple, watered down version of what you do exactly, how you do it, and the types of clients you work with?
Sure. So, I mean, I think and what you said there is not uncommon. I mean, business leaders and most people in the world don't really understand what or how software and hardware does what it does, right? But I think they do understand making more money, saving more money, right? So it's interesting. I think a lot of folks out there see software as a sort of a convenient thing, and they don't see it as a real business strategy, right? And so that's the type of software that we help people build, software that's part of their key strategy to the way they're going to go to market, to the way they're going to run their business or operate. So it's almost like software that enables a new way of doing business, right? So it's not just a tool or utility, it is the business in a lot of ways. Or at least it's a key part of it. We work with a lot of companies, a lot of different industries, but we've gravitated really over the last 12 years to a lot of companies that are sort of in a manufacturing and engineering space. So companies that are designing products, manufacturing, building them, and that can be anything from chemical companies who are, designing custom sort of chemicals as well as equipment and heavy equipment. And then we've also worked a lot in the healthcare space. That's probably the other big focus we have. And that's, those two sort of verticals are probably about 80% of our business. And basically, the pattern is always a customer says, look, we have done this thing via Excel and Word and email, or maybe a SharePoint site, or maybe on paper. We've done this. We've created this way of operating, but it's chaotic. It's cumbersome. Can we build a system that sort of encapsulates that, rounds that all up and puts that under control? And that's the sort of systems we do. So it's line of business solutions that really kind of cut through, the fat of operation, and that's what allows those systems to have a really, high ROI on them.
So basically, if I can summarize that, round peg for round holes rather than square peg for round holes, because I've come across, even in my own business, structured software products that somebody's trying to fit into our business rather than the other way around. Would that be a fair way of summarizing for somebody who knows nothing about it, like me?
Absolutely. That's exactly it. And because the systems we build are custom for that customer, like completely tailor built. And so you think about for yourself, like if I come to you and I say, hey, I want to sell a software product to you. It does 80% of what you need, but you're going to have to change the other 20% of your business to fit its world. Okay. What if, so number one, if you buy that and then every single one of your other competitors buys that and you all operate that same way, are you really very different from each other? What's your differentiation? You all run on the same, operating rules or whatever, right? With this system. But if I come and I say, we'll build something completely custom for you that does 100% of exactly what is in your DNA, that can be a huge competitive advantage then, right? I mean, sometimes that last little like 1 or 2 or 5% differentiation can make all the difference. So I think that's key.
How did you go from starting with, one client to now working with some huge billion-dollar companies? And I suppose there's a part B to that as well, Sam, which is what advice would you give to someone who started a business with just maybe 1 or 2 clients and are now looking to grow quickly and as efficiently as you have done over the years?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's interesting. When we started our business, our first client that we landed with, I mentioned my friend was an executive at this company. I mean, they are a $60 billion company. So they're a big German conglomerate called ThyssenKrupp. They're still a customer. And so initially, my goal and my strategy was, well, I'm just going to grow that account. And so I kind of, I got to know more and more and more people in that organization, and at one point, we even spread internationally. So we did work in Germany and, in South Korea and stuff, all for that company. But then you look at it and you say, wow, 100% of my revenue is tied to one company, one customer. And that is very common. I'm sure you've seen that, people end up in that situation, but it's not a good thing. And so then after we had sort of that growth in that one big client, my sole goal in life was just to diversify. I have to get into other businesses. And I've tried a lot of strategies around that. I've hired salespeople. We've done exhaustive, advertising campaigns, a lot of other things. And I think if you look at a little while ago, I sort of broke down all of our past projects into sort of a channel that it came from. And the most productive channels for us, of course, there's word of mouth and referrals. Everyone would say that, right? And I have had friends walk me into, there was another probably $10 billion company in Colorado we just got walked into because I had a connection there, right? But the one that's most exciting is really the organic sort of search presence channel. That's the one that more recently we've been having total strangers, come up to us who represent or are from very large companies, and mid-sized companies, because, we do business with both. But that channel is much more scalable. And I'd say in the last couple of years has become much more key to sort of our plans, because eventually you sort of run out of friends, all your friends who could have referred to you have. Right. And so I think for us, that organic channel through, whether it's blogging or local search or podcasting, any kind of content has been really key to us.
And on the subject of podcasts, you are also a podcast host, are you not?
That's correct. Yeah. So
tell us about Unstoppable Talk.
Yeah, so I started our podcast, Unstoppable Talk, in May last year. And I did that. It's funny because I have, I used to have a band when I got out of college and in college. And so I had sort of a little bit of a background in audio production. And, I had microphones laying around, that were dusty from 20 years ago, right? And so I had, if you look at our blog, I had kind of long struggled to regularly post content on our blog. I have friends that post every day, right? 1,000 words a day. That's just about impossible for me, I've found. And so when podcasting sort of started getting more and more popular, I put that out there. And it's interesting because if you look at, our blog is probably about 8 years old. And in 1 year of existence, our podcast has matched the traffic that an 8-year-old blog with probably 100 or so articles has on it, right? And for me, it's been much easier to create, an hour-long conversation than it is to write a 1,000-word post. But the show is basically about we say the intersection of business and innovation. So anybody doing anything innovative in business with technology, with their business model, we kind of sit and just have a conversation and dig into some questions about it. And I enjoy it because I think we really get some incredibly insightful answers through it. And sometimes our guests sort of uncover things they hadn't even thought of before. So it's been a good experience.
Love it. So everyone listening to this, when they finished with Sam today, they can tune into his and listen to him again for another hour. So that would be great. Now, obviously, in the recent past, Sam, there's a lot gone on in our world. And I think it's forced a lot of us to take a good look at the minutiae of our lives and our businesses, that detail we spoke about earlier. And we talked about the kind of the 80-20 thing, square pegs, round holes. To what extent does customization, because I know there's a lot of people that will say, oh, okay, I can live with the 20% that doesn't work. Can you help them to understand the correlation or lack of correlation probably is more important, because does it necessarily follow that the outputs and savings are not necessarily linked with the 80-20? In other words, what I'm trying to say is if they could improve the 80 to 100% because of customization, what effect would that have on productivity and profitability relative to that cost increase?
Yeah. So I think what I have found is that, like you said, you can't directly correlate, if you think about like your feature coverage is at 80-20%, let's say, with the value you're going to get. So let's say there's a potential, let's say you're a $50 million company, and if you built a perfect system for yourself, you could save, $5 million in operating costs a year, or $10 million, something like that. You can't look at it and say, well, this software does 80% of what we need, and so we'll get 80% of that 5 million. And so, whatever that is, 3 point something we'll get. It doesn't work that way. I think it can often be that a couple like really key features can give you, again, just like that 80-20 rule, can give you 80% of the value too. And so I've seen customers, for instance, we have a customer that, has spent a ton of money moving to a new ERP system, and they're really not getting any value or gain out of it. In the end, they look back and something like, I saw a survey a little while ago that something like 70% of customers who rolled out some of those big cookie cutter ERP systems look back and say, we didn't get anything out of this. Like there was no value to actually deploying this because we had to shoehorn ourselves into this other way. And so I think it can be that sort of, that little 20% feature that gives you 80% of the value that you might get. And in fact, I think it can be even more than that. Sometimes it can just be like a couple very, very key things you can hone in on. If you take it down, to something, to a real optimal fit for the way you want to run, that makes a difference. And it's funny because people, a lot of products that they buy out there, cars, telephones, whatever it is they're buying, they won't accept, well, this will do 80% of what you want. They won't accept that, right? No, I'm not going to buy a car that is just like okay-ish, people want a car that really fits what they want. And if they buy it and they discover it doesn't fit them, they'll turn around and sell pretty quickly, right? So I think software can be the same way, that to really get the best ROI out of it, there is no silver bullet. You can't just buy something off the shelf and hope that it's going to be fundamentally broad sweeping changes to your profit model.
So what's next for Unstoppable Software and Sam Schutte?
So I think So like I said, we, obviously our background in building these systems, we've focused a lot on, coming in and building new stuff for customers. And what I'm seeing here, and I don't know if it's due to the economy or other things, but there's a lot of attention and there's a lot of interest in other services that we can sort of expand into. And so, for instance, two of those that I'm excited about. One is sort of what I would call maintenance takeovers. So if you have a system that has been built and you've got, maybe a development team just sort of sitting around, or maybe they left, maybe they're not there anymore, but you just need someone to sort of keep it up and running. We've been having a lot of customers hire us to come in and just take over all the maintenance for their existing systems, which is interesting because then that leads us to discover things we can suggest for new systems, right? And then we've also been doing a lot of work with companies of coming in and trying to help them figure out sort of what's gone wrong with their team. What's wrong with our architecture, our software architecture, our team members, is there mentoring possible to try to fix what's going on there? And can we kind of come in and then help that team become more high performing? So it's all about kind of us further productizing our services, I think. And those are all sort of add-ons, I think, that are going to help us, increase our revenue quite a bit outside of our core offering.
Exciting times ahead. How do we find out more about Unstoppable Software? Sam Schutte, are you a social media kind of guy? I know you mentioned the blog, so you can give that a plug for sure. And obviously, we've heard about the podcast. But how would we find it easiest to find out what you're up to and communicate with you if we wish?
Yeah, so our website is just unstoppablesoftware.com. So it's unstoppable with 2 P's, software.com. If you go on there, there's links to our blog and to our podcast. You can also look me up on LinkedIn, just under Sam Schutte. And yeah, feel free to reach out. Anyone that has any kind of questions about ideas about how they might better run their business or take a new business model to fruition.
Fabulous. Thank you. So last question, Sam, because I can't believe half an hour has been and gone in the blink of an eye. If, let's imagine, a young version of yourself, a son, a daughter, came to you and said, Dad, kudos to you, all you've achieved, both as a leader, as an entrepreneur, somebody who's taken the action minus the business plan early on, but you still made a success of it all. And with all your wonderful experience that you've amassed over these years, But I'm only going to allow you to share a few words of wisdom rather than, give me all of that experience. If you could stick it into one little test tube and share that with me, what would that single piece of advice be to a younger version of yourself?
I would say persistence. Don't give up just when things, even if they get really dark. It's important to live to play another day. But, I think Steve Jobs said that there's, a ton of just really, really good companies that if they just waited a little longer and they didn't give up, it would have been amazing firms, And for me, I mean, there's been times, especially early on, where, we didn't have any projects for 60 days or something. And when I was working on my own, I was sitting there like, well, I have nothing to do. What's happening? And I think maybe a lot of people in their right mind would have, said, all right, well, I guess I need to go find a job, but I waited and I toughed it out. And, I remember when that particular time happened, at the end of that 60 days, a 7-figure project fell in our lap, So, it can be hard to weather through that, but I think once you've done it enough, once you've ridden that roller coaster a few times, you kind of get used to it. And you gain that value of perspective, like, we'll get through this coronavirus. We'll get through this, all these sort of economic problems. There is always a sort of brighter day at the end of that tunnel.
What a very positive way to end today's podcast with Sam Schutte. Sam, thank you so much for joining us and for just sharing so many lovely nuggets and inspirational insights into what's made you so successful, and long may that continue. So in all you continue to do, all the very best. And once again, thank you so much for being our guest on the Sandro Forte podcast today. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a great conversation. Well, thank you for joining us on the Sandro Forte podcast today. Wasn't Sam Schutte absolutely terrific? Such a great success story. Each week we have new guests joining us to share their own insights into achieving success or overcoming life's challenges. So please make sure you subscribe. Follow us on social media, Sandro's podcast with an S, don't forget, same on all channels. And if you want to email us with a question, it's hello@sandrospodcast.com. And please remember those two other things. To connect with me, Sandro Forte, it's the real Sandro Forte on Instagram because somebody pinched my name and I can't get it back. And please leave the reviews on iTunes so we know what you'd like more of in the future. Until this time next week and another terrific guest, goodbye for now.